Welcome to Relevant Revitalization, where you will find out the good, bad, and ugly of church revitalization. You will hear from pastors who have been through the revitalization experience, experts in the field, and much more, all with the goal of equipping, encouraging, and engaging you, your leadership, and your congregation to see God-breathed life in your church. Now, let's get into some relevant revitalization.
Welcome back to another episode of Relevant Revitalization. I'm your host, Matt Coyne, and today I'm excited to have Jess Rainer, lead pastor of the church at Spring Hill, co-founder of Rainer Publishing and founder and owner of Craft Book Publishing, also consultant at Church Answers, and he is co-author of the Millenials. Church Answers is actually where Jess and I were connected as I went through their church consulting course, and I was blessed to meet Jess through that and talk to him at the end of that. So Jess, it's great to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm good, and I'm glad you used the word blessed. Sometimes, some people that's not the word they use after meeting me or after talking with me, and so thank you for using that word. No, it's a joy. I know this is something we've been talking about for a while, to connect and talk about church and talk about church leadership and talk about how God is moving and things that we can be doing in the local church as church leaders. And so to be able to jump on this podcast with you is a joy, and I'm excited to finally be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have. Yes, it was a long time coming. I'm glad we could work it out. And I know when I first asked you, you go, "Well, I'm a church planter," and I said, "No. There's a lot there." And so that's part of your story. So speaking of your story, could you share a little bit more about yourself, your family, ministry, passions, hobbies, really anything you want?
Yeah. God got me into church planting, and I never thought I would actually even be in the local church. That was never my plan. I was on a track to be a certified financial planner. Long story short, God brought me into the local church, and he did it through a church plant. And that's how I fell in love with the local church. Even though I grew up in the local church, actually going through a church plant and being on staff and in a way that I never anticipated caused me to fall in love with the local church. And so since then, over the past 13, 14 years, I've been privileged to be a part of 3 different church plants, all in the Middle Tennessee area. And so I've served in different roles, but this third one that I'm a part of, I serve as a lead pastor. Okay. And so we just celebrated 8.5 years. So wow. No longer a church plant. So we've moved from infancy to maybe toddler. It feels like we got a little bit more stability underneath us. But that's where I am. And and most importantly, I'm a husband and father as well. And so I've been married for 16 years now. I think 16 years, have 3 kids. And so that's an absolute, that's my first ministry above all that.
Awesome. And I'm glad you said that, because I think the pastors who listen, we oftentimes forget that. We think our first ministry is a church, and you and I both know that is not the case. Not only, it's biblical and it's the way that God designed our family. So I'm glad you said that. That's just a little thing that I catch when pastors say. So thank you for saying that.
Well, I did glean that from my dad. He modeled it and he said it, and so that has stuck with me. So he says a few good things every so often that I hold on to. But that's one of the things he's passed down. My wife and my kids are my first ministry.
Awesome.
Church comes second, and I say that to the church. They know it too.
Yeah, good. And it's great that you have a church that, again, some churches, they'll be like, "Oh, yeah," and then they won't actually treat you that way. So praise God that yours does. So,
yes. So,
and I'm blessed with that too in my church. So.
It is a blessing. And one of the things, being the church planner, you could kind of establish that culture early on. But they've come. They don't ask me to do anything on Saturdays. They know that's family day, and and occasionally someone asks them, like, no, and they respect it.
Yeah, that's great. Well. Let's just jump right into our topic. Jess, I wanted to talk to you today about something that, believe it or not, we are one whole season into this podcast and a little into the second, and we have not talked about this topic, and I think it's crazy, and that's hospitality and welcoming first-time guests. And it's interesting when I ask churches who are in the revitalization journey, if I have the opportunity to walk alongside them, I'll ask them a question. What are you doing to make your guests feel welcomed? What are you doing to make them want to come back to your church? And the blank stares that I get and the answers I get really baffle me. I mean, it really baffles me because, a church, especially in revitalization, or who's early on in the church planning stage, especially, I would think, I mean, we want that all the time. I would think hospitality is what we want to do really well.
Yeah.
So my first question, hospitality is important no matter any size church, but why is it vital in a small church, especially one that is on the verge of closing its doors?
Yeah. To use some old church language that's been around for a while, you got your front door, you got your back door to the church. And anytime your back door is wider than your front door, you're not going to be growing as a church.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense that in being intentional about your welcome ministry, your greeter ministry, your first impressions ministry, it goes by many different names. It is a key component to growth, because these are people who have, and I believe, I say this a lot, taken the courage to come to your church. Anytime I interact with a first-time guest, not anytime, most of the time, I'm sure I miss it every so often, but most of the time I interact with a first-time guest at my church, I thank them for having the courage to visit a church.
That's great.
And you can see the look on their face. They're like, oh, yeah, like, thank you for saying that, because there's all these nerves. There's all these, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this is going to be like. Even though they've watched it online, we can talk more about that. But actually walking into the building for the first time, there's so many feelings and anxiety and nervousness. And so as a church, one of the greatest things we can do for someone is just to say, thank you for being here, letting them hear that, but also letting them feel that. That's a huge component. So it doesn't matter what size church you are, that needs to be an active part of your church ministry. It is absolutely vital. To use your word, it's absolutely vital, because someone is putting themselves out there that takes courage, and they want to know that it's reciprocated. They want to know that they felt welcomed, because that's going to make them way more likely to come back a second time. Yeah. So at a bare minimum, it's putting yourself in the shoes of a first-time guest and going, oh yeah, like, think about, if you're a local church leader and you're listening to this, think about when you went somewhere for the first time and you don't remember, you were nervous about going it. That's what's happening every single week, and hopefully every single week in your church. And so that's one of your greatest things you can do, is just calming the nerves, thanking them, letting them know that they're anticipated in being there, which is a whole nother thing. You asked that question, what are you doing? That's a huge thing, is to understand that you are anticipating them to being there as well. So I'll pause there. I can keep going, but I'll pause there.
No, that's good. I had someone once tell me, and I forget who this was, who said a first-time guest, they didn't just wake up that morning and go, I'm going to go to church today, and I'm going to Google a random church and go to it. No, they're there for a reason. And like you said, the online is, in today's age, they could have been attending your church, quote unquote, for a few weeks, a few months.
Yep.
And, that is still strange to me when people show up and they know who I am. And but anyways, again, that aside. And so I try to remind myself that. And when I partner that actually with one of my favorite books right now, who's actually been on our show, Jim Davis and the Great Dechurching, how many people might be coming back to the church after a hurt or after being dechurched. Yep. And it is so important the way we welcome. I'm sure you've heard this. I mean, there's that saying that most people will decide within 60 seconds if they're ever going to come back again. And I think that's so true. And now it's even the parking lot. Some people decide before they even get out of their car, are they going to come again? And
I actually think, and I don't know if there's been any research done on this. I think that window is actually going to be getting a bit larger because of the online stream. I say it to my we call it our welcome team is what we call our greeter ministry. I say, in all reality, we don't have first time guests anymore. These are all second time guests. Very rarely do we have someone that's walking in our building that has not gone online, not watched a sermon, not watched a service. And so they have already developed expectations, and it has to be favorable expectations, or otherwise they wouldn't have tried out the church.
Yeah,
and so
great point.
I've actually put a little bit of ease on our welcome team, because they have chosen to be here already after interacting with the church.
Yeah.
And so that our job then is to build on that favorable experience they've already had online. Now, I don't know how many people have watched online and didn't have a favorable experience and never showed up. So I don't want to do that research. But it does change the fact that it goes back to the importance of your online presence.
Mm-hmm.
Most people won't visit a church if they don't have a website anymore. If they don't have something online that they can interact before, they just don't go cold into a church anymore. Because even if you talk about, the unchurched and the de-church coming, unchurched coming, the de-church coming back to church, they're going to want to know. They want a little something that gives them the courage to be able to walk in the door. And so we're building on that as a church with we really second time guests, even though it's the first time they're walking in the building.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you added that. That's a great point in today's world. So Jess, another question I have for you is hospitality. And I'm gonna just go out on a limb here, and I want you to tell me, do you agree with this or not? Do you think that in a small church that hospitality should be at the top of what a church does really well? A church who is in revitalization, would you say, like I said, I'm kind of just going out on a limb and saying it should be the thing they do best. Do you agree with that or not?
I want to say I agree with it for every church. It doesn't matter what size. It has to be one of the top ministries that you're focusing in on as a church. I mean, think about it. If you were invited over to someone's house, and just for lack of better words, there was 4 people in the house, and you walked in and sat down, and no one said anything to you, and you just kind of sat there. Or you were invited over to someone's house, and there was 50 people there, and you kind of sat down, and no one really said anything to you. Which one are you going to feel more? What's the word I'm looking for? More burdened by it. I don't know if that's the best word, but more taken back.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that if someone was invited you over and there's 4 people, that at least one of them would realize this person is sitting by themselves. Someone should go say something to them. It's easier to feel like in a crowd of 50, I'm okay. Maybe someone just didn't notice that I'm here. It feels more, for lack of better words, excusable that no one said hello. So to me, when you think about a smaller sized church, whatever that may be, I feel like the expectation is greater from a first time guest perspective that someone is going to take the time to interact with them. Yeah. If you can sneak in and sneak out of a church, of a smaller sized church as a first time guest, they're probably going to feel more of that impact than if they walked into church of 1,000 and didn't have any meaningful interaction. So I think the expectation is higher. I really do. I think the burden's higher, and in reality, it's easier to know who's a first time guest at a smaller church. And so people, because they feel more vulnerable, because they know they're a first time guest and they're looking out. If a church of 50, all those 50 people know they're a first-time guest, that expectation's way higher, and there's a lot more to lose by not treating and rolling out the red carpet for that first-time guest.
Yeah, that's good. And when I first came to our church, we were about that 30 to 50, and it was talking to the leadership who was there. They're like, well, yeah, we pass out bulletins. They pass out bulletins. I'm like, what else do they do? That's all. I'm like, no. So I am thankful I've had a couple who've stepped into that, into that assimilation role, into what we call hospitality, that welcome team. And they have just gone crazy. I mean, it's just been so good to see. And people who, I will also say too, if you want to call them greeters, whatever you want to call them.
Sure.
I always say it's the easiest place to serve, and it's probably one of the most important. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not asking you to do a lot. I'm asking you to treat people with a smile, make them feel welcome, make them feel like we are so glad they're there. Give them a bulletin, and we still do the old school bulletin. That's great.
We do too.
Yeah, but that's not your number one. That's not your number one, responsibility. It's to make them feel welcomed. So yeah. So part of the reason I asked you, Jess, to talk about this topic is, I forget when I read this, but you wrote a really good article a while back on connection cards. And I believe your church calls them connect cards. Is that?
Yes.
So, okay. So one of the things, I shouldn't say it's funny, but it is, that I talk to churches and say, okay, so you have these connection cards. That's great. What do you do with them? Well, it just depends. They put them in the offering, and then it does. I'm like, okay, but what's the process? Well, and I'm like, is there a process? Well, and so it's really, I don't mean to sound crass, it's useless to have something like a connection card. If you get it, put it on your desk, put your coffee cup on top of it, throw it in the garbage, and not have a process. I mean, don't do it then. Just, it's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my next question for you, Jess. At your church, how do you go through that process? Someone filling out a connection card or connect card, what does it look like from the moment they fill that out?
Yeah. And to really build on what you're saying there, I actually think having a connect card and someone filling out and you not doing anything with it is way worse than not even having a connect card. Because again, you got to think about first time guests. They're vulnerable. They feel vulnerable. They're courageous to come into your church for the first time. If they take that extra step and actually give you something of personal information, they fully expect you to follow up.
Oh, that's
and
good.
So if you don't, the likelihood of them coming back is almost zero. Because, you think about it, whenever you're at a store and they ask for your email or phone number, you're like, they're going to call, they're going to text. And you fully expect that. At a church, that's the same mindset. They're thinking about if they give you information, they want you to reach out. So that being said, our process really begins when they walk into the door. We actually give them a first-time guest gift. And so we have, we just call them our welcome bags is what we call them. We just go through different iterations of our church. We have church coffee mugs, which is pretty common. Nothing special there. In that bag, we also include what we call our pathway, which is our vision statement and our mission statement. And it's a booklet that we created. We have it printed. It's nice. It's looking. We put that in the welcome bag as well. We also put a book by my dad that says "We Want You Here," which is a great resource for giving first-time guests. And so we put all that in a bag and hand them that bag. And we also, we put some bright colored paper in the bag because whenever someone's holding that bag, it lets the whole other church know that they're a first-time guest. And
That's
so
really cool.
Our church has been trained, hopefully, that when they see someone with that bright green paper bag, that they know, oh, that's a first-time guest. So they go out of their way to welcome them. So really, before we even ask them to give any information, we're making sure we have made them feel welcomed.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to ask someone to give you information if you haven't done that extra step of making them feel welcomed. The likelihood that they'll fill it out is a lot smaller if they haven't felt welcomed. First-time guest parking absolutely has to be a must. Again, it's showing the guests that you're anticipating, you're expecting them to be there. So I lead with all that because in order for you to ask, I feel like you got to give. And so if your expectation is to ask them to fill out a connect card, you got to give them something to start off with.
Yeah.
And so it has a multi-purpose with that. So during our service, what we do is during our welcome time, which happens between our first and second song, we make it a point to ask them to say, hey, we want you to fill out this connect card. And I'll say something, whether this is your first time or your 100th time, we ask every single person every single week to fill it out. So it's not that we're singling out just guest, first or second time guest. This is a practice that everyone in our church body does. And the way we follow up that is like, we want to connect with you. We want to write your prayer requests. Tell us what's going on in your life. If you're a first time, second time guest, mark it on the connect card. We'd love just to say hello. And then after that, we give them a little bit more motivation to fill it out. So not only have we given them something that because they're there, we're then, if they fill out the connect card, we're actually going to give back to the community because they're there. And so we donate $5 for every connect card turned in every single week back to our community. There's other organizations that we partner with, a local food pantry, Crisis Pregnancy Center. There's even some church revitalization that we're a part of. So for every connect card turned in, we donate $5. If you're a first time, second time, or a member of the church, it doesn't matter. So the practice then is we don't pass offering buckets or offering plates. We have some boxes in the back, and so at the end of the service, we tell people to go drop it in. So first time guests are seeing all of our church members drop their connect card in the boxes in the back. So it feels like a common practice. It's not something they're doing special. And so not only have we given them something, but we're also telling them because they're there, we're going to give back to the community.
I
And
love
so
that.
this it's super intentional about what we're doing. It's creating this environment and this atmosphere for the first time guests to know that, hey, you're just joining in with what we're already doing. It's nothing crazy that you're doing, and everyone here does it. But just because you're here, we want to say thank you and here's something extra.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a lot, but that to
No,
be able to explain the process fully, I
that's what I
kind of had to
wanted.
give all the details.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back and touch on a few points.
Yeah.
One, so you said you say it from up on stage. Do you ever do so at our church, we really struggle with people filling out connection cards. I don't know why. We were doing good there for a while, but I know we have visitors and they're not filling them out. We say it from up front. I mean, we have started to do like a virtual one as well with a QR code.
Mhm.
But we're just really struggling with it. Do you ever do any sort of personal ask? Like, so you do it from up on stage, but once you start building those relationships with maybe a second, third, fourth time visitor, do you ever have somebody who says, hey, have you filled out a connection card? I'd love you just to fill one out now. Do you ever do anything like that?
Every time I interact with a first or second time guest, I'll ask them that.
Okay.
I'll say, hey, the way we follow up is through our Connect card. Have you filled one out yet? No pressure if you haven't. Just
Okay.
curious, and make it. They're like, well, no. Well, and I'll say, well, if you will, that'd be great at some point. I love to just to drop you a text, or someone from our connections team to drop a text or something just to say thanks for being here. And they're like, oh, okay, and they'll fill it out real fast. Yeah.
Okay.
When we give out the welcome bags as well, we encourage them to also say, hey, if you get a minute in the service, we'd love for you to fill out the Connect card as well. So
Okay.
yes, there are the stage presence, but also, our team has been trained to ask them to fill it out on a personal level as well. So yes,
Okay.
it
And
should be happening. At
Yeah,
least.
and I like your order. So you give the bag out, like, so again, we used to do it this way where we said, fill out a connection card, we have a gift for you. And we stopped doing that. But so you don't do it that way either, correct? You give a welcome bag and then you encourage them to fill out a connection card.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't make it transactional.
Okay.
You give us this, we're going to give you this.
Yeah.
To me,
And that's how we felt. We felt like it was a transaction, and we didn't like that. So
this is saying, this is yours. We love for you to have it. And so anytime you can put something in a guest's hands that they can take home, the likelihood that they're going to return, I don't know what the stats say, is increased, dramatically, because they have to do something with it when they get home. Even if they just throw it away, at least there's something beyond the Sunday morning experience that connects them throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we like coffee mugs, because there's a good chance people are going to use it at some point. And it's just that reminder of like, hey, let's go back and visit that church kind of deal. So we've eliminated that transactional mindset and given them the gift up front and say, this is yours. Hey, if you don't mind, we'd love for you to do this, but you don't have to.
Yeah, that's good.
And we tell people, like, whatever information you're comfortable putting on the card, you don't feel like you have to fill the whole thing out. If it's an email, if it's a phone number, whatever you feel comfortable with, fill it out. It's better to get something than nothing.
Yeah. I like it. One other just personal question. On your mug, do you have your church logo or do you have something else?
It changes from time to time. Typically, our logo's on there of some degree. Someone from our communications team will often just design them whenever they run out. I'll say, "Hey, do a new design," and they. But yeah, I think. I was going to look see if I had some around. Typically, it has our church logo on it.
Okay.
Yes.
The reason I asked, again, another personal thing, was we started putting a different we took the logo off and put "How can I pray for you?" And that was what's on the mug. And the reason why is I was like, I want to give them a mug that is actually like, it doesn't have to be Rollins. We're on the pastor at Rollins Church. It can be something different. And we noticed that people were like, even people in our church were like, can I buy one of those? I was like, interesting. So just a side note, anybody listening, that like you said, the gift, I think, just makes them feel valued and welcomed. And so that's a good thing. The other question I have for you is what you were talking about before I get to the process. I love the $5 that you give back. That I remember reading this and I was at home and my wife, I go, Brittany, I said, listen to this. And I read this to her. She's like, what a unique idea. What an amazing, like, I love that. That is honestly, not to blow smoke at you, that is one of the most unique and cool ideas I've ever heard. So my question is, I just like to know, how did that come to be? Do you find it effective? And what impact has that made?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know where it originated from. So this happened early on in the life of our church plan, and I've been so blessed over the years to have godly men and women and leadership teams. I think that came up in a conversation of like brainstorming of some nature. So I give credit to wherever that conversation originated. I was a part of it, but I can't say this is completely unique to me, that I just sitting there one day, I was like, hey, I had this great idea. It came early on. I mean, within the first year of our church plan, it came up, but it was around the idea of like, how do we help people fill out Connect cards? We were struggling with that. And so, I don't have a solid answer, but it came from the church at Spring Hill at some point along the way.
Okay.
But it's made a huge impact. We actually, most weeks, I don't do it every week, but most weeks I report out how much money we've given out. And I typically do that either during the welcome or at the end. We have some closing announcements, very brief announcements we do. I'll mention this. Hey, guys, we've already given out $5,000, $5,000, whatever, this year, just from these Connect cards alone. It's that little extra oomph to remind people like, oh, this is actually making a difference. And so, and depending on your budget, it might not be $5. It might be $2. It might be $10. You just find what makes it work for you. But it does. That probably has... it probably has the biggest impact on people actually filling it out.
Yeah, that's great. And I like that you said add, it doesn't have to be 5. I mean, whatever your church feels comfortable. And
right.
I think I just love the idea. I mean, because you even think, the roundup, when you go to round up for change, when you go to a restaurant or to a store, they're like, would you like to round up? And unless you're a heartless person, you're like, well, sure, 22 cents. I'd do that.
Well, I may not do that too much, but
it depends what it is. Is what I mean.
I'm joking. Yeah. I do it on occasion.
Yeah. But like the idea of, oh, wait, I can fill this out and help the local community.
Yeah.
That is so amazing. I just wanted to.
And people aren't giving their own money. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
You're not. Yeah. So the roundup is, they're asking you to give more.
Exactly.
We're not saying you have to do anything to give money. If you're a first time guest, we're just going to give money as a way to say thank you for being here. So that even is that extra draw of, they're not giving their money. The church is giving away money.
Yeah. That's great. So listeners, heed that. We are talking how we're going to implement that and what ministries we're using. And I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'm going to be vulnerable. I forgot about that until we picked up the conversation. I'm like, what am I going to talk to? And then I remember, I'm like, I never actually went back to that. So the process of the connection card, I want to make sure I talk about that. Cause like we were saying, it's pointless to have this if you don't have a process. So Jess, it's filled out. They drop it into the box. Do you have any sort of like workflow? I know Planning Center has great workflow. Like, do you do anything like that? What does that look like? Yeah,
so we have 2 people that are in charge of actually getting the cards out of the box. Our prayer team will go and remove any cards that have prayer requests, and they go through a workflow. They go through a process to make sure the prayer requests actually get to the prayer team, make sure they get to our church leaders, and they also are queued if there's anything that's like very needed in pastoral care to like run it up the ladder. So that person will go get their cards. The other person will go do guest follow-up. So anything that has a guest follow-up card on it. We have a comment box, but we also have multiple boxes that people can check anywhere from you want to begin a relationship with Jesus Christ, you want to be baptized, you want to start serving, you want to join a community group. And so all of those things that someone can check then goes to our connections team, who we actually use Planning Center workflows. So whatever church management software you have out there, typically it should have some kind of workflow process. If not, an Excel spreadsheet can work. If you're a smaller size church, just have steps that you can track, and you can share a Google sheet, with somebody, and that's super easy. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but the main thing is to work the workflow. And that's where I tell our connections team, like, just work the workflow. I get triggered, second time guests get a handwritten note card from me. First time guests get an email, text, phone call, depending on what information they provided within the first week. All first time guests get an invite to what we call our starting point class, which is at the beginning of every month. So it's all in these workflows that we've established. And so each week, those two people go get the connect cards out of the boxes. They run their data entry and do what they need to do, and then it begins the process of actually doing follow up.
Right. And I also I heard you say within the week. I've been guilty, and then I'm like, it's fine. But I'm like, no, I mean, do you think I'm adding some questions I didn't tell you I'd ask. I'm sorry.
That's great. I love the conversation.
Do you think there's a sweet spot? I mean, do you think there's too overzealous, later that afternoon? I know some churches do that later that afternoon. Or is there too late? I mean, have you found, is there a sweet spot that you follow?
There's not a sweet spot because each person is going to be so different on what their expectation level is. What I have found to be the most effective is a first contact within the first 24 hours. Okay. And if that's within the afternoon, if that's within the next day. And so that's the goal for our connections team that we have is first contact within the first 24 hours.
Okay.
That's typically a phone call or text, depending on how it is. And we do, if it's a female, we have a female follow-up. If it's a male, we have a male follow-up. Just to kind of, again, that just helps eliminate the barriers of response.
Yeah.
We just found that to be more effective. We tend to get a better response rate when that happens.
Yeah.
And then within the first 3 or 4 days, we do a follow-up email as well. If we haven't heard from them, if there's a phone call, it was a great phone call, we got lots of information, we're not going to send them a follow-up email that says the same stuff. Okay. So it's a little bit specific in terms of how the follow-up process goes. Then at the end, I mentioned before the end of the month, depending on when they hit, they're going to get another email invite to what we call our starting point class. So that's 3 follow-ups within the first month. Sometimes for someone that might be 3 follow-ups in the first week if they come the last week of the month. And that's typically where we stop. If we don't hear any response after that, after 3 points of contact, we usually say that's where we stop. I don't know if that's the best practice. Honestly, I haven't researched that much. But that's where we've fallen as a church.
Okay. I like that you said you stop at one point, because I also think there's that hounding, where it's like we're not salesmen, we're not trying to call until what they pick up. So I like that you say that. My last question is actually logistical. Your cards, you told me a little bit what they look like, but I know how silly of a question this might sound, but for me, who is a nerd when it comes to logistics and stuff, what size are your cards? I mean, do you do any sort of digital, or do you have are they actual cards? Are they heavier set paper? And again, I know that's kind of a silly question, but somebody might be wondering that.
Yeah. I haven't even thought about that part of it. So our cards are size wise. I'd say, thinking about a sheet of paper, they're probably 11 inches tall. I think they're basically as tall as a sheet of paper.
Okay.
Maybe 3-4 inches wide.
Okay.
I don't know the exact dimensions of it, but that's kind of a general. They're long and skinny.
Okay.
So maybe 10 inches by 3 or 4 inches, roughly that size. And then we do have a digital. We have a QR code on the back of every seat, and so we tell people, hey, if you want to scan the QR code, you can fill it out that way. We get a lot less response with the digital than we do the physical Connect card. We had a season where we really pushed the digital Connect card, and it just didn't take. That's our church. Who knows? Maybe it's just habit, but people like to write still.
Yeah. That's same with us. We don't get many digital,
especially during the really boring parts of my sermon. It's a good thing that they can do. So, and maybe it keeps them off their phone. Maybe some people don't want to. Anyway, so we have both. And so we just put them in the seat back pocket in front of on every row. That's just the way we do it.
Okay, that's good. I like when people use their Connect card to write me either a good or a bad note about my sermon. That always makes me feel good.
And there's a few that love we got some good jokes that roll in, and so it becomes a thing. And yeah, it's really important too. And I look at all the Connect card responses as well. And I I'll jump in even though it's not in our workflow. Like if I hear someone say something about, hey, question about the sermon or question about, or maybe something that was, distracting, like a facilities issue that was distracting.
Mm-hmm.
I'll typically just send them a text. If I know who it is, a church member or something like that, I say, hey, thanks so much for the feedback. Like it really means a lot. So our church has been accustomed to like those things actually work. Like that's how you get in contact, or that's how you kind of, make a comment here and there.
Yeah, man. So good. So practical. I appreciate that. Well, Jess, I know we're coming down to our time here, but I always like to ask everybody who I have on, do you have any closing encouragement, advice, anything just for pastors who are listening that you can encourage them with?
Yeah. I one of the classics and this has nothing to do with Connect cards, so I hope that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. This is kind of your thing. You do what you want.
Okay, cool. It has nothing to do with, Welcome Team. One of the Tozer's classics, The Pursuit of God. It's a book that I've read multiple times throughout my life. For some reason, the last time I read it, I think it was maybe in the introduction or something. I'd never caught it before. And I'm not saying the quote exactly right. But there's something to the sense that Tozer wrote in that book that said, my hope is that I have a flame that burns just bright enough so that other men can light their torch off of it. And that has been my rallying cry for the past 12 plus months at the church at Spring Hill and that's been my prayer as well, is like, God, help me burn bright enough that my congregation, the people that you've entrusted me to shepherd, can light their torch off of. And just give me just enough that can happen for these people. And so my encouragement, if you're a church leader, ask yourself that question. How bright is your torch burning? And what I have found is that the more I'm intentional about just falling in more love with Jesus as just in my relationship with him, the brighter that I want to burn for him, the more it affects the congregation in a positive way. And so if you can find some time, and maybe it's that book, maybe it's go read The Pursuit of God by Tozer, and ask yourself, God, or ask God to help you understand what it means for you to burn brighter. That's my encouragement to you, because we need it. We need the courage to burn bright, especially in our world right now. Yeah. There's the church has gone from shaking to trembling, and I think God's ready to use the courageous few. And so let's pray that we're all part of that.
Yeah, that's some good encouragement. And what you didn't know is one of the things I forgot to ask you. So God's timing is pretty awesome. I have a friend who helps sponsor this podcast, and I give away resources of either authors or just pastors or just in general. So if you're listening, you know the routine. I want to give that book away. Tozer's book. So text the show on the show notes. You'll see text the show, text me. The first person I see who texts me, I'll give it to you. I'll send it out to you. So as always, thank you to Ryan over at Church Merch for making that possible. But Jess, for you, thank you so much for being here. It was such a great conversation. I'm so glad we were able to work this out. And you shared so many great, wise things and input. So thank you for that. But for our listeners, just want to remind you all, this is more than a podcast. I really want to walk alongside you. So if you need prayer, if you need to talk to somebody, I just want to equip, encourage, engage you in your season of ministry. Part of it's the podcast, but the other part of it is, I want to, build those relationships with you. So Jess, again, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
This was great, man. It was a joy. As I mentioned, I'm glad we finally were able to do this. And
me too.
I'm so thankful for your ministry. So thankful for this podcast.
Well, thank you.
That you're out here just helping others. And we need it. We're all working together. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ.
Amen.
We're all working together. And so thank you for your ministry.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate those words. All right. Well, until next time, I am Matt Coyne, and this is Relevant Revitalization.